From radar and tanks to the World Wide Web, these pieces of battle tech have changed the way we operate in our everyday lives and in the trenches. We're counting down the battle tech that changed military conflict forever. Racing onto our list, it's Chariots of Fire. Okay, no, actually it's just regular Chariots sans fire. Sorry, we got excited. Chariots were two-wheeled vehicles drawn by horses that normally carried a driver and a fighter armed with bows and arrows or javelins. With a chariot, warriors could shoot enemies from a distance while on the move, making themselves into a moving target that was harder to hit. Serpentine! Wheeled vehicles probably originated in Mesopotamia around 3000 BCE, but it took the development of the lighter spoked wheel around 2000 BCE to make the war chariot possible. The use of chariots in battle also marked the first use of horses in warfare. Apparently, up to this point, no one had thought to ride a chariotless horse into battle. It would be another 1,000 years before saddles and stirrups, which allowed for effective mounted combat, to be developed. The Hittites used chariots to secure their first kingdom around 1700 BCE. And soon, chariots became a staple in empires throughout the Middle East, India, Babylonia, China, and Persia. These badass horse-drawn carriages were a symbol of power and warfare across the world until their use began declining around 500 BCE. Row, row, row your trireme gently into battle. These oar-powered ships were used by Persians, Phoenicians, and Greeks in the 700s BCE. Triremes were built with a thin shell of planks that kept the boat light and able to travel at speeds up to 8 miles per hour, largely powered by the strength of 170 rowers. Talk about manpower! Triremes often sported a ram used to pierce the hulls of enemy warships at sea. Unfortunately, these onboard battering rams were usually not strong enough to sink enemy ships, so triremes also crewed up with spearmen and bowmen to attack above water and attempt to board enemy ships. Triremes were used during the Battle of Salamis between the Hellenic League and the Persian Armada under the rule of Xerxes I, which ensured Greek autonomy and allowed Athens to take the center stage in the Aegean. Score one for triremes! Exploding onto the scene in 850 CE was gunpowder. While any explosive mixture used as a propelling charge in guns or blasting agents can actually be classified as gunpowder, the first iteration was made from saltpeter, sulfur, and charcoal, now known as black powder. Black powder originated in China, where it was first used for fireworks and signals, and later in a primitive gun called huo chang, which channeled the explosive power of the powder through a cylinder. By the late 13th century, guns made of brass or iron were being developed, and larger firearms such as cannons would soon follow. Traded on the Silk Road, recipes for gunpowder had reached the Islamic world and Europe by the 13th century. Gunpowder gave birth to a new type of soldier and transformed warfare forever. It is still used in firearms to this day. First used in the 1600s, repeaters, or more technically, repeating rifles, are a rifled shoulder arm with a spring-loaded box magazine containing metallic cartridges which are fed into the chamber by lever, pump, or semi-automatic mechanism. Before repeaters were available, soldiers carried muskets that were dangerous, inefficient, and unreliable. By the mid-1800s, the revolving cylinder rifles from Miller and Colt became the most common, and the lever-action 7-shot Spencer repeater and the 16-shot Henry rifle were used by troops in the American Civil War. These firearms allowed troops to fire from greater distance than ever before and unload consecutively more rounds without having to reload, forever changing the landscape of warfare. Developed by Jean-Joseph Etienne in 1859, the internal combustion engine would go on to be put to work in stationary power plants, early automobiles, motorboats, and machine tools. By burning a combination of fuel and air, internal combustion engines convert the energy released by burning fuel into useful mechanical movement. Internal combustion engines would go on to play a huge part in World War I, changing the speed, range, and terrain of war by enabling tanks, supply trucks, planes, and submarines to come into play, changing the battlefield forever. Some trace the origins of the submarine to David Bushnell's Turtle, which attacked British ships during the Revolutionary War in New York Harbor in 1776. Or perhaps Dutchman Cornelius van Drebbel's 1620 vessel Drebbel I, thought to be the first working submarine. Or you might even say it dates back to 332 BCE, when Alexander the Great was said to have been lowered into the sea to study fish. But as far as we're concerned, the birth of the modern submarine came in 1897 from John Philip Holland, who combined the electric motor, battery, and internal combustion engine. By the mid-1900s, these types of submarines were commonly used in warfare, most famously the U-boats in World War II. Nuclear-powered submarines hit the scene in the mid-1950s with the introduction of the USS Nautilus. And today, submarines are an essential part of the U.S. Navy, used for ballistic missile deployment, intelligence gathering, and special forces operations. Developed by the British in response to trench warfare, the tank was built with wide conveyor belt-like tracks to crush obstacles that had stopped previous infantry attacks. Tanks allowed troops to advance farther and attack enemy lines when armored cars couldn't push through. When the prototype tank Little Willie rolled off the English assembly line in 1915, the Brits were hopeful it would change warfare forever. They were wrong, at first. The initial prototype was too heavy and too slow, often getting stuck in trenches. So, the inventors of Little Willie improved on the prototype and soon released the second version, known as Big Willie, in 1916. Big Willie made its battlefield debut in the First Battle of the Somme on September 15, 1916. Through the remainder of the war, tank designs would keep improving, and soon they became one of the most dominant machines on the battlefield. Tanks have provided infantry support and allowed for travel over broken ground from World War I through today. Perhaps the most impactful piece of World War II battle tech was the cavity magnetron that was developed by John Randall and Harry Boot in 1940. Though the first magnetron had been developed by H. Gardine in 1910, Boot and Randall made their magnetron tube out of copper rather than the previously used glass. Now, the tube's output wavelengths could be tuned efficiently by drilling cavities into the block, creating shorter and more accurate waves. These developments made centimeter-band radar practical, meaning that radar systems could now be integrated into smaller command spaces, such as planes and ships. Thanks to this technology, pilots could access scans of the ground to see their targets at night, and bombers could target submarines just below the surface up to 6 miles away. The implications were incredibly significant and changed warfare forever. Many believe that the cavity magnetron made a significant difference in the outcome of World War II. "Now I have become death, the destroyer of worlds," said theoretical physicist J. Robert Oppenheimer as he quoted the Bhagavad Gita after witnessing the first successful detonation of the atomic bomb he helped to develop in 1945. Oppenheimer would come to be known as the father of the atomic bomb, pioneering the transformation of nuclear fission into one of the most destructive forces known to man. In August of 1945, 2 of these bombs were detonated by U.S. forces over the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki during World War II. Their use resulted in the instant death of over 120,000 people, and the fallout caused many more thousands of fatalities and long-lasting injuries to the people of these regions during the following decades. Eventually, the existence of these weapons would result in the Cold War nuclear arms race, which held the threat that any nuclear state could launch a nuclear attack and kill millions within minutes. Thankfully, since the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the world has not had to witness any more such events to this day. Based on technology from old ground radio devices used in World War II, GPS was born in the space race era of the Cold War. In 1960, the first satellite navigation system, Transit, was used to provide position updates to the United States Ballistic Missile Force once per hour. During the 1970s and 80s, the U.S. fully updated their use of satellites to support navigation system with timing and ranging, aka Navstar, and also made them available for civilian use. Today, GPS is a space-based radio navigation system owned by the U.S. government and operated by the U.S. Space Force for national defense, homeland security, civil, commercial, and scientific needs. The military embraces GPS as an essential part of virtually every weapon system, and everyday civilians embrace it as an essential part of virtually every cell phone and smartwatch on the market. The final piece of battle tech on our list is also the home of MySpace. Dial up, it's the Internet, which was first invented for military purposes during the Cold War. Seriously, Google it. In 1966, ARPANET, or Advanced Research Projects Agency Network, was created and funded by the U.S. Defense Department as a communication link between military and university computers that wouldn't be disrupted by bombs or enemy spies. For ARPANET to be useful to forces in the field, it had to be accessible more broadly. Cue the Internet. By 1996, the growing global Internet went mainstream with the World Wide Web and was accessible for the average citizen, bringing us endless scrolls of enriching cultural experiences like Club Penguin and BuzzFeed. And of course, the deep holes of YouTube, where you are right now. Hi there! What a wild ride! This list ranged from gunpowder and nuclear bombs all the way to the home of this very video, the World Wide Web. Did we miss anything? Be sure to let us know in the comments so we can Google it or blow it up.